Welcome back to the Foundation in C# course. We are currently in Module 9, and this lesson we're going to be creating our search form in our WPF application. So let's go right to the homework. The homework is to create a form. Now pause right there. You can either create a brand new form and then go directly to that form instead of main window, or you can use main window as this form. It's up to you which you want to do. But either way, the application is going to start on this form. So it's up to you how you do it, but create a form that allows the user to search for bookings. So display the bookings on the page and wire this up to the class library. We already have our user interface design in that we did back in the use step of this course. So we already have it kind of drawn out a little bit roughly. Now take that drawing and turn it into an actual form that actually works. Okay, so that's your homework. Go ahead and do that and pause the video now. Okay, so I'm assuming that you've now completed that work. Let's go over to Visual Studio and we'll do it together. So the hotel app.desktop is where we're going to start. I'm going to reuse main window. I think that's fine because it really is the main window, the search window. So let's call it good, and we're going to set up our XAML. Now the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here to my XAML, and I'm going to set up my grid. So grid.row definitions, and then also column definitions in just a minute. Now, just note we can flip these around, so we can do like this, I think, which would be probably better for what we're doing right here. But also, there is the ability to pop out the XAML if you want to have it on a totally separate screen. It doesn't do me a lot of good on one monitor, but it is really helpful if you have two monitors or an extra wide monitor or something like that. So this little pop-out button right here is new and it's awesome. So definitely take advantage of that if you can. So we're going to say the row definition is going to have a height of auto, and then we will close that out. I'll copy this and I'll paste it a couple more times, just 2 for now, and I'll put a star for the last one. The star meaning use up the available height. So auto is just enough height for what you need, and then star for use the available height. We'll do the same thing for columns. So grid.column definitions, and column definition, the width is going to be auto. And then we will, let's copy this, and we'll paste it a couple of times, just 3 total, and the last one being star. So again, that right column will take up the available width, and the first 2 are just the width they need. Let's actually add one more row. I think I need one more. And we can add more as we need them. Let's come down here after the definitions, and we're going to start with a text box. Text block. And this is going to have text of search for guest, like so. And we'll put this in the correct grid row and column. So grid.row is 0, which is a default, and grid.column is 0, which again is a default, but I'm specifying just to be clear where it's supposed to go. Now with this, notice the text is there, but it's tiny. Let's come up here to our form, and we're going to say font size equals 18. Let's make it even a little larger. Let's make it 20. And we're going to say font family equals, I always spell this wrong, so let's go to properties right now and look at our text font size and make sure that in fact is the one I want. So nope, I flipped the E and the O. So there we go. So go. There is our font family. It's a little different. And the last thing I want to do is I want to put some padding on my grid, whoops, not padding, it's margin, and let's put a margin of, let's go with 20. That looks about right. And it brings everything in about 20, or not about, exactly 20 pixels. If you want the grid lines off, go outside the grid. So notice I clicked outside of this grid, and now the grid lines are gone. All right, so you click somewhere on the grid, you're going to get grid lines and all the rest. Click outside the grid to see what it looks like without those lines. So search for guest, that's not a great size. We could make that a little bigger. So font size is 28. It's probably more significant for a title. So that's our title. And now let's do a stack panel with an orientation of horizontal. And we're going to say this is grid.row of 1 and grid.column of 0. And I think that's it for what we have to declare inside there. Now we can add things to our stack panel. So our stack panel is going to have a last name. So text box x:\name equals last name text. And we're going to have the min width to be something like 100. Just give it some width, like so. And now we have a text box. Notice it's right there. So now we have our search for guest and a text box, which is a little small. So let's make it 200. That sounds more appropriate. And then we'll have a search button after that. So we're going to say button. The name is going to be search for guest. And inside the button, we will say search, like so. The only problem is that we're kind of all bunched up together. We're not going to do too much formatting here, but let's do just a little bit. So let's, on our text box, we're going to put a margin. And the margin is going to be 5 all around. I think it's good. And we'll do the same exact thing for our button. So margin of 5. And then we're going to do a padding of 5 as well. And that makes our button a little bigger, and it makes our text box a little bigger as well. So there's our search for guest. Okay, so I think that's probably good. We can lay this out a little better to be more easy to read on the screen. And I think that gives us what we need for our search portion. Now, before we proceed, let's wire at least this up so we get some information back to then bind to our list of results down below, which hopefully is only one result ever, but you never know, so we're going to find out by trial and error. Okay, so with that, let's go to our code behind for this page. Let's go to solution, and we will right click and say view code. And this is where we have the code for our main window. So let's start by going to our Solution Explorer, pinning this, and we're going to ask for a iDatabase data here in main window. iDatabase data. And then we're going to say db control dot to initialize a private field. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set up a binding for this button. So we're going to bind this to an event, the click event. So let's give us a little bit of space here. So let's go on the next line. And we're going to say the click event. So click. And notice it says add a new handler. So you can just click that. And it says search for guest underscore click. Cool. Over here, we have a search for guest underscore click. Perfect. That's what you want. So what we're going to do, we're going to search for the guest. So underscore db dot, and we should have a method in here, search bookings. We do. And inside there, we need a last name. Well, what is the last name? Well, we have this last name text. So last name text dot text. That's the text for our last name. And this is going to return back a list of booking full model. So let's create a list of booking full model. Well, you know what? Let's not even put it up here. Let's just capture it for now. So list of booking full model control dot, whoops, I had it run into the underscore DB. John Doe. So actually, you know what? John Corey. And we're going to spell it right. My son's name is John, but he doesn't use an H. It's Jonathan. So John Corey, that way we have two Coreys in theory that have a booking for this date. So book. All right. So that should be all we need. And now we can go back to this project right here. We can set it as a startup project. And let's put a breakpoint right after we click the search for guest click and get the bookings. So let's make sure this is working to this point. So we're going to run this application. And it should launch our search, and it does. So let's search for Corey and click search. We get to here, we have a list of bookings. And it says 1. Well, we have John Corey. Evidently, the other person was not a Corey who booked that room. So bummer about that, but that's okay. So now we know for certain we have a booking of a king size bed for $100. Let's add one more booking then, just so we have another one. So set as startup project, and we will launch the web app. Oops. Web app. Can't launch a library. And once the web app launches, I'm going to add in another booking. Let's add this one through, the 28th. We'll search and we'll say we want 2 queen size beds. And this is for Timothy Corey. Hit book. Cool, that's done. And that should be all we need, just a couple of them, just to have something. We'll set this as a startup project again. We'll run it again, just to make sure that, in fact, it is working as expected. Always good to test these things. So now bookings has 2. And if we open one up and let's come down here and let's pin the price. So the price for this one is 100. The price for this one is 115, which the price is actually, I want the total cost instead. There we go. So total cost. So now you can see the total cost for one is 100. The other one is $2,070. Notice I'm pinning just one property. I can see it when I expand it out, which is really nice. Both of these are Corey's, but if you notice, results list, and we'll say that it's on grid.row of 2 and grid.column of 0. Now, so far I've only ever done column 0. We might not need to have 3 columns, might just need 2. In fact, let's just do that. Let's just have just 2 columns. No reason to stress this out with multiple. So column 0, and we'll do a, down here, let's do a margin. Let's do a margin on the left of 5, on the top of 20, on the right of 5, and on the bottom of 5. Okay, so there's our margin, and then we have our list box. All right, so that way we have a good amount of space between the search box and our list box, but everything else is pretty much the same as far as our margins go. Now, as I'm looking at this, I'm wondering if we expand this out, we may have a case where our text box gets larger, or our search button does. Let's just see if that's going to be the case. So let's put this, the width, temporarily as 600. And it looks like it's going to be just fine. So that's how I test things out. Just put a temporary width on there. Don't hard code the width, but that way you can test out what's going to happen with your form and how it's going to respond. All right. So now what we're going to do is we do need an item source here. So items source, and we're going to say this is just a binding. Now we're not going to give it a value to bind on. We're just going to say binding. We'll bind it in the code. Then we'll say list box dot item template. Inside here it's going to be a data template. And inside here is basically anything you want as long as it is one item, essentially. Now that may sound confusing. You're saying, well, it's just one item? Well, yes, but we only ever have one item in window. That's the grid. Inside the grid, we can have multiple items. All right? But like a stack panel can have multiple items. But some things can only have one item, window being one of them. But by putting a grid inside the window, that's the one item. Inside the grid, you can have multiple. But it's only counted as one item inside of window. So we can have one item, and it could be a grid. I think that's probably overkill. Instead, I think what we'll have is we'll have maybe a stack panel or set of stack panels. In fact, let's do that. Let's have a stack panel, and the orientation on this is going to be vertical. And then inside here, we'll have horizontal stack panels. So this is essentially one column, and then we'll have in each row, we could have multiple items if you wanted to, using stack panels with an orientation of horizontal. Now, this is the cheap and easy way of getting around having a grid with the column and row definitions. Now, we don't have to have a stack panel with orientation of horizontal if we only want one thing on a line. Okay? So in this case, what we're going to have is let's have a text block that just says reservation name. So let's have a margin on this of, let's go with 5 all around, and we'll say reservation. And then at the end, we'll have a text block. And I believe we have, is it full name, or we have first name and last name? Okay, so I'm going to have a binding here. Don't worry about the invalid markup. That's because I started a text block. So we're going to have a binding on a text block. So text equals binding on first name. And let's have a margin on this of, let's go with 5. Let's go put it next to it, because there's no reason to have this showing at all, because we're not actually seeing anything at this point. So now we have a stack panel that has the room, and after that is going to be the name of the room. Then we'll have another one that is room number, and I believe that's called room number. How about that? So room number. And we'll do the same thing over again, and this one is going to be the total cost. And over here, there's price, and there's also total cost. Well, makes sense that it's total cost. So I think that's pretty good. We've got the room type, we've got the room number, we've got the total cost. And so now all we need to have is some type of button that says allow them to book. And we can either put that at the bottom down here, or we could put it right next to the first name and last name. So right after they can say, book room. I think that's probably cool. Let's do that. Button, and let's not give us a name, but we're going to say margin equals 5 is probably good, and let's put padding on this of 10, and let's say in here book room, or check in. How about that? Now let's assign values to this and see if we can get this wired up and running. So we have our bookings, and here this is called the results list. So it should be, we can say results list dot item source equals bookings. Let's see how well this works. First time, maybe it'll break, and that's okay, but it's worth a shot. So Corey, search. Look at that. It's ugly, but it's in here. So reservation for John Corey with a king size bed, room 101, and the cost is 100. Or Tim Corey, and we've got 2 queen size beds, room 202, and the total cost is $2,070. Now these are not formatted as numbers. It's a really ugly formatting right now, and it's just horrible. But otherwise, it's in place. So let's make a few tweaks. First, we're going to make sure that all of these are, all the dollar signs are changed to, actually have dollar signs instead of this 100.0000. Let's start there. That's the one that's kind of the most glaring, at least in my mind. So total cost on our binding here, it should be, we can say string format, and then say it's C. For currency, let's make sure that works. And we'll search for Corey and search. And yep, that works. So now we have this one and we have this. Notice we don't have a scroll bar either. That's not ideal, especially if you have a really long page. So we'll have to fix that as well. I also think we should bold the reservation and room number and total cost. Those should be bold probably. Also, we need to put some spacing between these two sections, and then after that we'll work on the scroll bar and making these look a little better with this. So let's make this bold. So anywhere we see a text block, we can say font weight equals bold. So text blocks get a font weight of bold, and that should solve that problem. Let's make sure. We'll do a search. There we go. So now we have our bolded values. Now let's work on getting this layout right, because this button makes this huge, and we don't want to put it right underneath because that makes a list even longer. We have more space in the horizontal. And we're not going to spend a ton of time here working on formatting, but I do think that a couple of these things are important even for an MVP. So what we found is the stack panel not working out for us. We do need a grid. We need a little bit more power here. So let's do a grid. The number of columns in auto, that's the number of columns I want. The last column I shouldn't fill. That's the one that has the auto spacing for whatever space is left. So with that, now I'm going to take this button out. So let's cut this out of here. And I am going to say that this is grid.row of 0. And then down below it, I'm going to say the button right below a stack panel has a grid.row of 0 and a grid.column of 1. Now for this stack panel, grid.row of 1. I'll copy this for sake of expediency and paste them in 2 more times and say 2 and 3. Notice I did not specify a column, which means by default we'll have column 0. Now with this, it should be we have a little better spacing on our grid. So Corey, we'll do a search, and now, yeah, it's a little better. It's not perfect, but it's a little better. The problem here is our button is still in the 1 row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say grid.row span is 4. And then I'm going to say that the vertical alignment is center. Okay, there's a lot of stuff in that button. But with that, it should be that we align our button in the middle of all the rows. Let's try it out. Come back over. We say Corey. We do a search. And there we go. So now it's aligned in the middle. There's not weird space between reservation and room. And we can just say check in for John Corey or Tim Corey. Still no horizontal, or I'm sorry, still no scroll bar yet though. So let's add a way to do scrolling, which is not built into grid, which seems odd, I know, but it's not. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to collapse this down. I'm going to cut this out temporarily. I'm going to add in a scroll viewer. Okay, and then I'm going to, inside there, put my grid. Now that should be, I believe it will add the scroll bars as necessary. We might have to specify. Let's find out. So, Corey, do a search, and now we have one for each item. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Wrong place, Tim. So we Control Z to undo that. And then we collapse actually the list box. Now the list box is on row 2 and column 0. So let's make sure you put that back where it goes. So scroll viewer. And then inside here we can say scroll this list box. And as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, you know what, Tim, why are you doing this? Because I believe, this is where you have to learn XAML really well, or know it where to kind of poke around. I believe scroll viewer dot vertical scroll bar visibility is auto. It's already built into list box. So let's cut this out of here and get rid of scroll viewer. There we go. Know your different values. They can be helpful. I think this will work. If you have a grid, grids are trickier. I was thinking I had a grid, but I didn't. I actually have a list box with grids inside of it. So Corey, and it still is not showing me any kind of a vertical scroll bar. So I think the issue here is actually let's do this. Let's play around with the height of our window here, our list box. So if we said the max height is going to, let's set height first, because we can set max later. Let's do 500, and that's too large for a window. Let's do 300, and that's about right. So let's say the max height is 300. And the reason why is because now it will shrink down to 0, or practically 0, until we need it to be larger. When we fill it out, then it will be larger. And if it's too large, then it will scroll, or it should. So now I can say Corey, search. And now we have a scroll bar for our elements. And so it's a little bit off the page, but there we go. So I can scroll between the two elements that way. So we've got something working. It's not ideal, but I think it works better than nothing. Now we're not going to wire up the buttons yet because we don't have a form to actually check in this guest. The form is got a little page that just basically says, "Yep, we're going to check them in and actually do the check-in." Okay, so that's going to be all it does. But just a pop-up saying "Yep," and then we'll be done. Okay, so let's come back for that in the next video.